Thank you, Chairwoman Cantwell, for holding this hearing and for your commitment to continued oversight. I also want to thank our witnesses and all those who worked on the expert panel review. This review confirms my view that we need to judge Boeing by what it does, not by what it says it's doing. Boeing says it prioritizes safety above all else, but when the expert panel asked Boeing to produce evidence of this commitment, the evidence that Boeing provided, and I quote, did not provide objective evidence of a foundational commitment to safety that matched Boeing's descriptions of that objective, end quote. That should be shocking, but based on some of Boeing's recent actions, frankly, it's not. Weeks after a door plug blew out of a 737 MAX 9, Boeing was still petitioning the FAA for a safety exemption to rush its next 737 MAX variant into service, despite the fact that it had a known potentially catastrophic safety defect. To its credit, under pressure, Boeing eventually withdrew that petition. But the fact that Boeing filed it in the first place speaks volumes about the lack of a proper safety culture at Boeing, and until recently, the lack of a proper regulatory culture at the FAA. Boeing filed this petition because they thought FAA would grant it. Boeing thought they could minimize the significance of this safety defect and that the FAA would just let it slide. Boeing had a good reason to think this. FAA let Boeing's bad actions on the 737 MAX slide for years, and, go figure, we're seeing more bad results. I'll give two examples which I think are particularly relevant to our discussion today about Boeing's Organization Designation Authorization, or the ODA. The first example involves MCAS. Boeing downplayed MCAS so successfully, it actually persuaded the FAA to let Boeing remove it from the flight manual. And after MCAS crashed two 737 MAX planes, killing 346 people, investigators uncovered an internal Boeing memo showing that Boeing had been explicitly planning to downplay MCAS in order to avoid regulatory scrutiny. The plan called for Boeing to not even use the term MCAS when describing the plane to a regulator. Even worse, the memo showed an ODA unit member approved this plan to deceive a regulator. And yet, when this memo surfaced, the FAA did nothing. It did not even investigate. By sitting on its hands, FAA effectively told Boeing that this type of conduct was perfectly fine. The second example concerns the angle of attack disagree alert, the AOA disagree alert. Shortly after the 737 MAX 8 went into service, Boeing discovered that the AOA disagree alert was not functioning on most of the 737 MAX jets, which was a violation of the plane's approved type design. Instead of reporting this to the FAA and to 737 MAX pilots, Boeing intentionally concealed this and continued to manufacture more 737 MAX jets with the same defects. In other words, Boeing made a decision to knowingly and repeatedly violate its approved type design for years. Boeing's ODA knew about this, but did not alert the FAA. And when FAA finally found out that Boeing had been knowingly and repeatedly violating its approved type design, the FAA did nothing. This effectively told Boeing that type design doesn't matter because the FAA isn't going to always enforce it. When the FAA fails to take action in response to bad behavior, it sends an unmistakable message to both Boeing and its employees that bad behavior is acceptable. No wonder the expert panel found that Boeing employees are so confused. FAA needs to more closely scrutinize Boeing's behavior and make use of its civil enforcement authority when appropriate. And I am pleased by the more aggressive regulatory tone Administrator Whitaker has brought to the agency. But as this expert panel review makes clear, there is still a long way to go to bring an effective safety culture back to Boeing. We have our work cut out for us on this committee as we continue our oversight and consider whether additional legislation may be needed. And I thank the panelists for being here. I really appreciate your hard work on this to make flying safer for the American people. Thank you, and I yield back, Madam Chair.